there, fellow Patriots. Welcome back to Patriots of the American Republic. We've got another episode here. I've titled it Racial Divide for a very specific reason. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. Now, having been born in the very late 70s, my memories of my childhood stem from pretty much the 80s and the 90s. I was born in the northern part of New Jersey, and as most boys, was very much into lots of pop culture. My uncle, who was about 5 years older than me, was like a big brother. Just about everything that he liked, I liked. Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Voltron, Transformers, He-Man, Superman, and anything that had to do with superheroes. All of that I found and still hold near and dear to my heart. And it continued as I developed into the 90s. Now, one thing that was normal to me in the area that I grew up in was racial diversity. Though I personally experienced some negative racial encounters. Examples: being called a stupid white boy in a derogatory manner as a child by few blacks, maybe it was like 2 or 3 blacks, being called a dirty Mexican by very similar individuals as I became a teenager and more of my Hispanic features became a little bit more obvious, and then eventually being called a spick by a white woman during my high school years were all examples and instances that that I experienced, but I never took those examples or instances to generalize and classify an entire group of people as racist, right? I held those examples to those specific individuals, and they did not go beyond that. I mean, heck, it was just 4 days ago, I was told I shouldn't be president of the United States because I'm not white. Now, I know diversity, equity, and inclusion are dirty words now, based on how the left has abused those terms in order to, or has used them and abused them in order to vilify and discriminate against white people. But back then, there wasn't this racial divide on the scale that we have now, and currently I've seen it since the Obama term. Am I saying there's no examples, there aren't any examples of racism? Of course not. But what I am saying is that many people agree that we reached an obvious peak of racial harmony, and now it's an obvious decline once Obama came into office, right? Specifically, I would say his second term, but you can make the argument for his first term. Now, since then, the left has been obsessing over racial issues, even to the point where they invent stories and lies in order to emotionally manipulate people for political gain, which then impacts the growing racial divide in this country. Now, a few years back, Obama said racism was in our DNA. Question: was he speaking specifically about people in America? Listen, racism isn't just an issue. It's not just an American issue, if that's what he's suggesting. There are examples of racism across the globe, and it's been that way for a very, very long time now. Not sure if the divide was always based on race, but we can easily see, based on historical records, mankind would always divide itself either based on tribes, kingdoms, regions, whatever. Race just happens to be the newest form that continues to plague our society. However, Larry Elder provided us with some data a few years back to counter Obama's pessimistic view of our country. Let's take a look.
Is racism still a major problem in America? President Barack Obama certainly thinks so. He said that racism is in our DNA. Really? If racism is in our DNA, doesn't that mean it's immutable? Unchangeable? But America has changed, and dramatically so. In 1960, 60% of Americans said they would never vote for a black president. Almost 50 years later, the black man who said racism is in America's DNA was elected president, and 4 years later, re-elected. That's only the most obvious example of racial progress. There are many others. Take interracial marriage. As William H. Fry of the Brookings Institution wrote, sociologists have traditionally viewed multiracial marriage as a benchmark for the ultimate stage of assimilation of a particular group into society. Black-white marriages were still illegal in 16 states until 1967, and a 1958 Gallup poll found that only 4% of Americans approved of black-white marriages. Today, that number is 87%. In 1960, of all marriages by blacks, only 1.7% were black-white. Today, it's 12% and rising.
Despite massive racial improvement improvements, the left continues to focus on race as a primary platform in order to manipulate people in order for them to either gain or maintain political power. None was more obvious than in 2024 election we just had. Instead of trying to focus in on policies to help improve the lives of every American, they focused on identity politics such as race and gender. Vote for me because I'm a black woman, and if you don't, you're a misogynistic racist. The left desperately tried to browbeat people to vote based on skin colors. Here's Obama specifically talking to the brothers as he addressed it. It's not seen in this video, but he was specifically talking to the brothers.
You're coming up with all kinds of reasons and excuses. I've got a problem with that because part of it makes me think, and I'm speaking to men directly now, part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that. That's not acceptable. That's not, this shouldn't even be a question.
And I just wonder for anybody who heard that, like what they thought of that.
Deeply offended. I was deeply offended. And it felt like a moment where it's like, you N-words better get in line and do what we say. And it felt like him as the czar of the Democratic Party coming down to say, go get these N-words in line. And the general tone of it was disgusting. It was abhorrent. I don't respect it. I didn't like nothing about it.
Did you notice in that video how, it was predominantly misogyny, but because he was focused on just the brothers, right? It was racially motivated. So you've got racially motivated and you've got gender motivated, undertones here. And so thankfully this strategy massively failed, and the majority of people saw past this deceitful and really superficial tactic, as that gentleman expressed at the end of that video. Now, the left manages to find unbelievable ways to find racial matters in just about anything. If you like vanilla ice cream, guess what? You just might be a racist, right? That's how ridiculous these people are. So here is Congresswoman Crockett making a racial matter over elected seats.
And I want to make sure that we really get to the nitty-gritty on Texas, because this is hilarious to me. Texas added 2 seats. In 2020, according to the census, and we know that there was a significant undercount, specifically in Texas for a combination of reasons, but we know that specifically Texas added 4 million people. Of those 4 million people, do you want to take a guess at how many were Anglos? Just a guess.
I'd say a majority.
180,000. That's it, of 4 million. 95% of the people that were added. And we know that when it comes to minority populations, they tend to be undercounted. So get this. We added 4 million people. They were people of color. Texas got 2 new seats. So they took those black and brown and Asian bodies. And guess what? Do you think that we got a new black, brown, or Asian seat? Somehow, the way that they do their Republican math in the state of Texas, that amounted to 2 new white seats. Guess what? White Republican seats. We got 2 new Republican seats out of 4 million people of color. So let me tell you, they love to use our bodies to apportion us in an inaccurate way. All right? So when
amazing. Absolutely amazing. Could you guys imagine a white person making this argument, right, and getting away with it in Congress? Okay, could you guys imagine a white person saying, look, all these whites moved to our state and we got 2 Negroes elected? How does that make sense?
Unfortunately, the left continues to make race their focal point. Instead of helping us come together as a people, they're hell-bent on continuing to create division by making any scenario they can about race and primarily pinning up blacks or people of color against whites. In a verdict that took place this past Monday, Daniel Penny, a white man who was being tried for killing a black man, was found not guilty in a New York courtroom. With no surprise, BLM was front and center, seemingly inciting vigilantism from blacks towards whites.
Racism is still alive and kicking in America. There's no other way to view this. everyone has looked at the case, and those among you who say that Daniel Penny is innocent have racism and bias in your heart. If you look at the facts of this case, then you understand that Daniel Penny is guilty. But today, white supremacy got another victory. Today, the KKK, the Klansmen, the evil in America got another victory. They got that top charge dismissed. America shall continue to America and shall continue to place second-class status on black people.
Black Lives Matter is back after remaining dormant for the last 4 years. They didn't want to harm old Joe or Kamala's chances of winning the election, so they stayed out of it this year. But now they've anointed a new saint, whatever the guy's name was, who Daniel Penny had to stop from attacking people on the subway. They're very upset because they were hoping that the white man was going to have to go to prison for years.
We need some black vigilantes.
That's right.
People want to jump up and choke us and kill us for being loud.
This clown is obviously so uninformed or in denial about the new saint who was literally threatening people on the subway and saying that he was prepared to die by attacking the subway goers.
How about we do the same when they attempt to oppress us?
Right.
I'm tired.
He's tired of having to work for a living. He wants his reparations, yo. Would you like to be saying something, sister?
Forgive me for being jaded and cynical, but once we saw those non-white jurors, we knew that this case was over.
Oh, so now there were too many white jurors. Well, it's supposed to be a jury of your peers. Some would argue that maybe there weren't enough white jurors. Of course, when there are too many white jurors on a jury overseeing a black defendant, then they always get upset about that. They need an all-black jury when the defendant is black, but if there happens to be a majority white jury when the defendant is white, then they get upset about that.
Jordan was labeled a drug addict and labeled a crackhead. The only crime that Jordan nearly was guilty of was the color of his skin.
Come on.
But luckily for Daniel Penny, his skin was not like Jordan's, because you honestly wouldn't have seen our face. The NYPD would have arrested him after 3 hours.
The amount of hatred in these people's voices is very clear. Now, in addition to this craziness, the left-wing media is also implicit in trying to make this a racially motivated issue when there's no indication of it, as the details of the case bear this out. Now, by jumping into action the way that Daniel Penny did, he potentially helped save the lives of many people of color, and the man who helped Daniel Penny was also black. But that isn't stopping the leftist media from trying to twist this and turn it into a racially motivated situation, which hence increases the racial divide.
I want to bring in the politics of this because when I hear lawmakers hailing Penny as a hero, as a good Samaritan, really being promoted, can you help me understand the thinking? We started at the top of the show talking about the killer of the United Healthcare CEO being hailed in similar terms.
Yeah, let me just help you understand. If you're on the American left tonight, here's my chart. The good guys today, Daniel Penny. The bad guys, Luigi Mangione. It seems to me,
how do you?
Everybody
what's
on the left,
chart for victims?
I'm just telling you what I see out in the world.
I know. I just want you to finish the chart. Which victim is good and which victim is bad.
What I'm telling you is
that's not on the second page.
People on the left can't seem to tell the difference between the good guys and the bad guys.
People on the left. I'm asking you whether you consider this person.
We had people praising Luigi.
I want to know whether you think that, as
Congressman
Congressman Crane does, that Daniel Penny should get the Congressional Gold Medal to recognize his heroism. I'm not asking you about anyone else.
I think he ought to get medal. I think they ought to build a statue to this guy in New York City.
I think that race, and I'm going to say it. I'm going to say the dreaded R word. Race plays a role in this, right? And so we see it. Yes, absolutely, because statistics say that.
Wasn't there a similar case in New York City?
Statistics say that when people kill people who are white, they tend to get harsher sentences, especially if they're people of color.
What about the Jordan Williams case?
That is what happens in our criminal justice system.
First of all,
no, I'm not going to stop because race absolutely plays a role in this.
I said, what about the Jordan Williams case here in New York? Same situation. African-American, gets on a subway, ends up killing a guy, grand jury tosses it out at the exact same time as the Penny kid.
What about
But
Bernard
that's
Getz?
different. That's different. That's different because
What's
he
different?
used the same weapon that the alleged victim had. So he was using his own weapon. He was met with deadly physical force. Jordan Neely, all he had in his pocket was a muffin.
All right, listen,
Yeah,
guys.
well, he
First of
was
all,
threatening.
this is not a left-right issue. I'm on the left, and I actually think this was the right decision. Because the reason I think this is the right decision is because that's what the jury decided. And juries tend to get this stuff right. And that's what we have to believe in. There were multiple witnesses that were people of color. There were multiple people on the jury that were people of
Thank
color.
you.
I think it's
There was
not
one black
really
person
okay
on the
to
jury.
call this a race issue. One of the guys who helped hold him down was a black man. He, testified too on his behalf. Like, this is not a race issue.
So
The jury who spent days and days and days and days listening to detailed facts came to this conclusion.
What?
Do I think he's a hero? No. Do I think he was a good Samaritan trying to protect people? Yeah. But there's a difference.
Well,
because somebody
here's a
died,
fact,
and that
though.
really is awful. And
Here's
I'm
a
not
fact.
saying that it's okay that somebody
Daniel
died.
Penny agrees with
I'm
you.
just
All right, stop.
saying
But Daniel
that
Penny
I don't
agrees.
think
Stop right there. You stop it right now. Listen, Scott Jennings made sense. He had a good argument. A little bit further to the right, he had a good argument. The lady next to Scott Jennings was a little more balanced, nuanced, but she had a great argument. It made perfect sense. It's not a race issue. The jurors are the ones that deliberate on evidence that they either watch at the trial or that's presented to them that they deliberate on in closed quarters. This is what they do. 99% of people that hear about this case, talk about this case, did not watch every hour of what the jurors heard from the prosecutor and the defense. You didn't hear it. You weren't privy to the evidence. You didn't get to watch more evidence. You didn't get jury instructions. You didn't get none of that. So the jurors have a better perspective than the layman just watching television. Why? Jesus, help me understand. Why does Scott Jennings make sense? The lady next to Scott Jennings, this guy makes sense. Why is it that the melanated is something in the water?
Now, over the last decade, racism towards whites has been obvious and undeniable. But another group of people that experience racism as well are black conservatives, even more so than Hispanics, to be quite frank. There is some pushback when you're Hispanic, but it's massive when you're black. People like Candace Owens, Larry Elder, Dr. Ben Carson, and many others are called some of the most racist things I have ever heard of, not only from white leftists, but also by fellow blacks who are on the left. Now, it's absolutely disgusting. Actually, I want to correct that. I don't even hear it from white leftists. Usually, I have seen some, but I predominantly hear it from black leftists towards black conservatives. Now, Stephen A. Smith, who is admittedly votes towards the Democrats more often than not, has been pushing back over numerous matters regarding the Democratic Party. And in a recent video, he calls this specific issue out on his show.
Let me get back to the issue, however, of black conservatives. And I've touched on this subject on many, many occasions, and I'm going to touch on it now, but never before have I touched on this subject the way that I'm going to right now. There's a lot of times it could be a Candace Owens. It could be a Larry Elder. To a lesser degree, it could be a Byron Donald. I remember Armstrong Williams. He's been out there for many, many years. I've known him for many, many years. Even to a lesser degree, somebody like Sage Steele, who used to work at ESPN and now, helped the Trump campaign. And who knows, for all we know, I don't think she's interested in it, but who knows? She might end up being press secretary one day. I don't know. Whatever it is, I hope she does well. I wish her well. Sage and I got along. Let me say this. Over the years, we've seen a level of vitriol emanating from black conservatives to a point where people who are not conservative vilified them because of it. I was never down with that. I'm a registered independent who primarily votes Democrat. There have been several occasions I've been tempted to vote Republican, to vote conservative. Hell, some of the times I regretted I didn't. And who knows what the future holds with me with some of the nonsense that I saw from the left, particularly leading up to this election with woke and cancel culture and all of that stuff. But that's a different story for another day. Here's the point that I want to make. While finding myself wishing that the inordinate amount of black conservatives that have been out there and are still out there would sort of dial back their vitriolic responses to the venom that's been thrown in their direction, I've rarely blamed them. Because you got people in here looking at folks from the conservative side who happen to be black, calling them sellouts and coons and all of these kind of negative connotations, showing them no respect as human beings just because you don't agree and side with their ideology. Who the hell are you?
So I think it was last year when I did a video on the rise of anti-Semitism, happened right after the October incident over there in Israel. In that video, in one of those videos, I highlighted examples of the left's anti-Semitism, but I also discussed my concerns over the right's apparent anti-Semitism. It appears, I mean, so the party was divided, right? The Democrats were obviously divided because of, everything, their contradictory views and their contradictory stance, and they're willing to appease everybody. But my concern was that, not from a leadership perspective, but the Republican base, due to all of the issues from, the Bush Jr. era or the Bush Sr. era, getting into countless wars, foreign money going, they have become, they want it, how can I say, they want to pull back and kind of become like an island, and they don't want to get involved in any of that stuff, and I agree with that. However, it even stemmed into not helping Israel, not sending them funds, not helping them out with anything. And I understood that if you were an atheist or not a person of Christian faith, but it boggled my mind how you can take that position and call yourself a Christian when the entire Bible is focused around Israel as the pinnacle point. As a matter of fact, when you look at the book of Revelation, it doesn't say that there's going to be a new America here on earth. It says that there's going to be a new Jerusalem. So the entire focus is in that area, which was very, very confusing. And it seems as though this pocket, I don't know how big it is, it just seems to be growing and spreading a year now down the road. So it's with great sadness that I have to report that this growing group of individuals on the right that are they're openly identifying as racist. Now, they probably won't call themselves that because, heck, Hitler himself didn't see himself as a racist or a white supremacist. He probably saw himself as a hero, not as the villain. But whatever you consider yourself, and the right, we do this. If I'm a guy and I identify as a girl, the right is gonna be like, no, you're a guy. We're not gonna play make pretend here. We're not gonna give into your delusion. Well, likewise, if you are not calling yourself a villain, but you are acting like the villain, then guess what? You are the villain. But just like the left does its job of masquerading their intentions by changing or shifting words around, these people have done the exact same thing. Instead of calling themselves white supremacists, they're not calling themselves white nationalists. It's like socialism versus democratic socialism, in my opinion, or equity, right? Just an example that comes to mind because they seem to be the same peas of the same pod, or two slightly distinct peas of the same pod. One pea just happens to be slightly bigger than the other pea, but make no mistake, they come from the same racist pod.
You would get along with Stephen Ignoramus. He's another member of our crew, so he says this kind of stuff too.
Is he a white nationalist?
He calls himself a national socialist.
Oh, so he's a Nazi.
That's what he calls himself.
Excuse me.
Well, no, I mean, that's...
He calls himself a white identitarian.
Based?
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 Well,
Ray,
he calls...
Ray, can we get it? Can we get it one
Good
time?
Good night, everybody. Ray's like, I gotta shut the show down.
What are white nationalists, you might ask, and what's the difference between them and a white supremacist? In essence, not much. White supremacists believe they are better and superior race, and they are only for whites, and they don't want any other minority group around. It's similar to, you know, what the KKK believes. The KKK and the white supremacists are the same, right? What seems to be the only difference with the white nationalists, they don't believe they're a superior race, but all the others still apply. And if you kind of want this white-only type of country, right, you want to go back to, I don't know, the early 1900s or something like that, you know, and you want it to be white only or whites, what's the difference? What is the difference? You know, you might say that you love your spouse, but if you go cheat on them, you clearly don't. So if you don't think that people of color, those people that are not white, anybody who's not white, if you think of them any less, what are you really, right? It's clear. It's clear to me, right? So this past Sunday, I was invited to a podcast where I joined a guy who I've known for, you know, I would say 8, 9, 10 years, who came out and self-identified himself as a white nationalist. I got a little taken back. In his white nationalist view, he believes that whites should not racially mix and uses the Bible to justify that point.
They get you ready for, but even like non-major stuff, like all the race mixing. I mean, it's in like every commercial now. It's to the point of like almost like parody because like normies are noticing it. But again, when I go back and watch the stuff from like the 80s and 90s, it's supposed to be based. Everybody says, oh, the 80s is so based. But then I'm watching this cartoon and it's got race mixing in it. And I'm going, the fuck is this?
Well, you remember
doing this on Saturday
Well,
morning.
we disagree on that. We disagree on that.
Yes.
Wait, I'm sorry. Both of y'all were talking. I didn't hear what Greg said, and Ray, I guess, disagrees with me.
Yeah, I disagree with you on that part.
Well, I was gonna say, like, you could bring it back to like what was it? Star Trek came out back in the 60s, and that featured the first interracial kiss with William Shatner. It was the first interracial kiss featured on
in the 60s.
Yeah,
like I said earlier. Remember, the 60s was where it started. And they made a big deal out of that.
Oh yeah,
they still to this day they still talk about it.
I've never heard them talk about it once.
Oh yeah, it's the first. I mean, that's why Greg brought it up just now. It was the first interracial kiss on TV.
Huh? Interesting. That's
like it was something to be celebrated.
First mongoloid ever made. I'm sorry.
He also seems like he wants to go back to a time prior to legal migration movements, right? No minorities.
What American culture came from was white people, and not the multiculturalism didn't come around till like the 60s. You know, I think 50s or 60s when they opened up the borders.
Oh yeah.
So
I'll be the first person to say that I am not a fan of multiculturalism. I think multiculturalism is a scam.
Yes, exactly.
And believes a U.S. president must always be white.
Yeah, I just want, you know, and Ray looked at me kind of weird when I told him that I you know, and maybe you probably wouldn't like it either, you know, because he's a brown man. But I like in terms of like a policy perspective, like in terms of a president and introducing policy, I probably would have preferred Ramaswamy because I think he was the only guy that said we got to chill on the Israel shit, like, you know, chill on the money to him.
I mean, I like that he said that, but we should not have a non-white president. White male.
Like I said before, this guy, you know, I've known for, like I said, about 8, 9, 10 years. He's been working with me on an animated project, and I've helped him get a few paid gigs as a voice actor. Stood by this guy's side when, you know, the left came after him for calling him a homophobe, for not wanting to show inappropriate material to kids, right? And they, you know, labeled him a racist for not supporting BLM, which none of that is actually true. But to hear this now coming from him is not only shocking, but even more shocking is the growth of his channel, popularity, where his thought process seems to be growing movement, and it seems to stem from two possible situations. The left's open racism towards him is now causing an opposite push in the other extreme. And I would imagine this is the same for this group. In that video that I showed you, Ray actually says that he's got other guys. And based on how the stream went, it seems like this is an actual group that seems to be growing with intensity. Trump's victory, the second point, Trump's victory may be another factor that has inadvertently emboldened these people. Even though Trump himself has disavowed racist groups and white supremacists on several occasions, this hasn't caused these folks who all support Trump to rethink their position.
Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups?
Sure. You've got David Duke just joined, a bigot, a racist, a problem.
Would you repudiate David Duke?
Sure.
David Duke and robocalls are out again, the white supremacist movement supporting you. Do you have any words for that?
Well, I disavow. David Duke endorsed me? Okay. All right. I disavow. Okay?
When we looked at it and looked at the question, I disavowed David Duke. So I've disavowed David Duke all weekend long on Facebook, on Twitter, and obviously it's never enough.
Trump's refusal to condemn, just distance himself from white supremacists.
The Anti-Defamation League is already out there asking the president to clarify why he didn't condemn white supremacists.
So are you prepared right now to make a clear and unequivocal statement renouncing the support of all white supremacists?
Of course I am. Of course I am.
When Chris joined, we had a news conference, and they asked me the exact same question. I said, I disavow. I disavowed then. I disavowed today on ABC with George Stephanopoulos. I disavowed again.
David Duke is a bad person who I disavowed on numerous occasions over the years.
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. I totally disavow the Ku Klux Klan. I totally disavow David Duke. Ultimately, he got to the Ku Klux Klan, which obviously I'm going to disavow. I've rejected David Duke. I've rejected the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan.
David Duke is saying to his supporters and followers, vote for Donald Trump. White supremacists are saying, vote for. Do you want those votes?
No, I don't want them, and I don't want him to say it.
And you want the supporters?
No, I don't want anything.
What do you think of white supremacists, by the way?
I don't like any group of hate.
David Duke announced his Senate candidacy, claiming your agenda.
Are you ready before you ask the question?
Newt Gingrich said every Republican should repudiate this guy no matter what it takes.
And I do. Rebuked. Is that okay? Rebuked.
Rebuked.
Done.
Just to clear it up this morning, can you, naming it, make a declarative statement that you denounce, that the president denounces it?
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists.
Do you want white supremacists to vote for you?
No, I don't at all. Not at all.
His campaign is denouncing a show of support from the KKK's official newspaper, as in the Ku Klux Klan.
In the same New York Times interview, he denounced white supremacists. He denounced the neo-Nazis who support him.
President Donald Trump signed a congressional joint resolution that condemns white supremacy, neo-Nazis, and other hate groups.
When he was asked to condemn white supremacists, he didn't.
And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally.
When specifically asked if he would denounce white supremacists, that the president dodged it.
I spoke out forcefully against hatred, bigotry, and violence, and strongly condemned the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, and the KKK.
Well, I have to say that it's disappointing that a sitting U.S. president can't outright condemn white supremacy.
In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy.
The President of the United States, in the year of our Lord 2020, refuses to condemn white supremacists.
Any group of hate, I don't like it. Any group of hate, I am, whether it's white supremacy, whether it's any other kind of supremacy, whether it's Antifa, whether it's any group of hate, I am very concerned about it, and I'll do something about it.
Now, I reached out to this guy to get clarity and meaning on his, white nationalist views, and it's exactly what I described earlier. It's a white person who wants white-only type of mentality, similar to BLM wanting a black-only mentality. What's even more painful is that this guy openly calls himself a Christian and is using the Bible and other outside sources to justify his position. This group of Christian nationalists, due to their anti-Semitic views, have gone as far as deeming Christ as not being a Jew, but being Caucasian. It's a very, very similar posture as the black Israelites or racist black Christians who think Christ is black. The truth is, no one knows his skin color, and it's all speculative or wishful thinking. In the 15 years that I've been diligently reading and studying my Bible, and I've even taught it, I ran my own ministry, ministry that I was heading, I have never come across skin color as a description. I could be wrong, but I don't remember it. And if I don't remember it, it was not prominent. To my memory, the Bible always describes people by region, gender, sometimes age, child or elderly person, right? Handsome or beautiful. I've read through those. Religion, right? Jew, pagan. Class and or profession, right? Class meaning rich or poor, right? And profession, obviously, either a king or like in Joseph's case, he was a carpenter, right? Stuff like that, right? Throughout the entire Bible, God views, this is a biblical fact. Throughout the entire Bible, God views people in just three simple manners. You're either a Jew, which are his people, right? Those are his people. Those are the people that started this. And this is where the focus is on, down over there in that area, right? Those are his people. Even though they have rejected him as a whole, that was prophesied. And that rejection, actually, which is part of the equation, then opens the doors for the Gentiles, which is everybody who's a non-Jew. That would be the Caucasians, these white supremacists and white nationalists that think that they're purists. That includes them. They're Gentiles, just like I'm a Gentile. And then your third class are unbelievers. Whenever you read the Bible, that is how God describes these different peoples. You're either a Jew, a Gentile, or an unbeliever. That's it. You won't in the Bible, you're not going to read about white people, black people, Indian people, Asian, nothing. It doesn't classify people in that manner. So here's a little test that you can do for yourself if you don't believe me, and I don't want you to believe me. I do want you guys to look into it yourselves. Here are just, again, some examples. What skin color was the woman at the well? She was from Samaria. So she was a Samaritan woman. What skin color was she? Doesn't say. What skin color was the actual Good Samaritan? The Good Samaritan is a good example because what happens is in that particular moment, the Jews and the Samaritans were enemies. They didn't like each other, even though they're I would say they're more like cousins, genetically speaking, but they didn't like each other. They had different cultures, they had different beliefs, more than likely different God. I shouldn't say more than likely, they had a different God. So they didn't like each other. So what's the story? You've got a Jew at the side of the road, and he's laying there, and his own Jewish brethren are ignoring him. And then here comes a Samaritan, and the Samaritan helps him, gets him up, takes him over to a place, cares for him, pays for his stay there, pays until the guy recuperates, right? That is the principle of the Good Samaritan, is that you help the people that you're supposedly don't like, right? You help out any. That's where we get the phrase a Good Samaritan. You're also helping out someone that you don't know. Again, focus on what skin color was the Samaritan. What skin color was the young rich ruler? The one that came to Jesus and said, hey, Jesus, I've kept all the commandments. What do I do to be saved? What skin color was he? What skin color were the disciples? We've got 12 of them, right? Some of them wrote books. What skin colors were they? None. It doesn't say it. All of these people, the focal point of the stories, except for obviously the Samaritans that were from Samaria, but like in the case of the disciples, they were Jews. But it never ever says skin colors. Now, as for Jesus being a Jew, that's another thing, right? These people don't want to follow anybody who isn't white. That's why they believe Jesus is Caucasian. So they don't want to acknowledge that he's a Jew. Jesus taught at a synagogue. Here are some reference points. Mark chapter 1, verse 21 through 28. Luke chapter 4, 16 through 30, and John 18, 20. Non-Jews couldn't teach at a synagogue, no less than a Muslim or a Christian or an atheist can teach in a synagogue today, right? No faith-based organization allows someone of a different belief to preach in their building today. So the likelihood of Jesus not being a Jew and teaching at a synagogue back then is slim to none. So the idea that these people, the thought process that these people have is absolutely absurd. It's not based on biblical principle. It's based on a complex issue, to be quite frank. That's the best way that I can describe it. Now, it's troublesome that people are twisting God's word today more than ever before. To me, it's a sign of the time where people will not want to hear sound doctrine. That's in 2 Timothy 4:3. But time will tell. Meanwhile, it seems that the division in our country will continue to rise now from both sides, and it saddens me to see my country so divided. I don't know of any country as divided as we are today, and it pains me. I didn't grow up with looking at people with different lenses. I grew up with, if you were born here, legally, you are American, right? And obviously that law actually pertains to even if you cross over illegally, someone is born here. I get that. I get that argument. I don't agree with rewarding somebody for breaking the law, right? To me, I actually do agree with Vivek Ramaswamy. And if you are here illegally, you cannot have birthright citizenship, right? Why are we going to, reward breaking the law? That doesn't make sense to me. It never made sense to me, even when I was a teenager, before all this controversy. But anyhow, and just so that you know, when I first started this podcast, I did it with the intentions to help fight back against the fake news coming from the left. But equally, I wanted to open up the eyes of the Hispanic community from the lies of the left that the Republicans are only for whites, right? I think I've made that very clear on several podcasts that as Hispanics, we're given this lie that Republicans are only for whites, right? And the Democrats, they're for minorities. Now, I've been vocal to say, no, that's not true. But now, given the encounter that I've just had and realizing that there is this pocket of people that are going, I'm afraid I'm afraid I may have partially been wrong. And my concern is that as long as this group continues to get more vocal with their obvious racism and they gain momentum, folks that are politically in the middle of the ground or unsure, they're going to continue, they're going to swing back in the other direction, right? So here you've got a group of people that were like, well, wait a minute, you just told me, Carlos, that Republicans are not like this. They see me as an equal. I'm Hispanic. They see me as an equal. They see me as an American, just like them, and so on and so forth. And you're telling me they're not racist. Well, here when they encounter these types of groups, these types of people, all it does is it pushes them away. It minimizes my voice, or people like me, right, who are trying to get them to see, no, Republicans are not like this. And it just says, yeah, that's exactly what I've heard all my life, and that's exactly what is, and that's exactly what's happening. I don't want any part of that. I'm going to continue to vote Democrat, right? So that pendulum, that type of scenario is going to cause the pendulum to swing in the other direction and keep those people over there in the crazy theology of the Democratic Party. So it's really, really concerning, guys. But that's what I have for you. I'm going to make a public announcement, and I know I don't have that many followers or influencers. I'm not a big influencer like other people. But, guys, human decency and human respect, right? I was born in this country, born and raised in New Jersey. I'm American. I love my country. I don't hold any allegiance to the countries that my parents came from. So why am I considered less of an American in the eyes of these people? Simply because I'm not pure white. It's wrong. This is racism. This is discrimination. And we as a party and as a group, specifically as Christians, we need to call it out. Because the Bible, there's no indication that Christ favors one race or one skin color over another. That might have been true back in the Old Testament, because remember, Jesus himself said, hey, salvation first came for the Jews, but now it's for the Gentiles as well. Right? If I'm not mistaken, it's the book of Galatians where Jesus says, now there is no difference between Jew or Gentile, man or woman, rich or poor. All are equal under Christ, right? That's the engulfing message of the gospel. The gospel is for everybody, every skin color, every nation. As a matter of fact, that's what he told the disciples. Go out into every nation and spread the gospel. Share the good news. You know, I asked this guy, I asked him, you think heaven is only for white people? He got offended. He got upset. It's like, oh, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. No, but you're not saying that. And I'm asking you a simple question. Because I would hope your common sense would tell you, no, it's not. Right? And so if it's not only for whites in heaven, why would you as a self-professing Christian want to only have whites in your area or your neighborhood or your country? Why would you want to isolate yourself in that manner discriminately? Don't we pray, our Father who art in heaven, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So if heaven is multicolor, why would you want something different here on earth? It's discriminatory, and Jesus doesn't back that up. And the guy sent me a bunch of scriptures that twisting how God doesn't want interracial marriages or unions, and those are all taken out of context. God does tell the Jews, the Israelites at that time, not to marry people from other tribes and other areas, but it wasn't because of their skin color, it wasn't because of their culture, it was because they worshipped other gods. And it clearly says, why? Because you're going to bring those gods into your house, and then you're going to be split between me and that other god. And we know by the first commandment that God is a jealous God, and he doesn't want us worshiping other gods. That's why constantly Israel got punished by God, right? There's so many examples of interracial couplings, if you will, or marriages throughout the Bible. I mean, this guy's absurd with his thought. These people are absurd with their thought. Moses, for example. Who does Moses marry? Where's that lady from? She wasn't a Jew. She wasn't an Israelite, because all the Israelites were back in Egypt. So this was clearly a woman from another area, from another culture, from another background. And yet he married her. Jacob. Who did Jacob marry? Wasn't it Rachel? Was Rachel an Israelite? No. Uncle Laban was in another area. And they were related. But he was in another area. Not in the same area. Not considered an Israelite. There are multiple indications, areas where you can see that this is not a color thing, right? This scenario is not a color thing. But anyhow, guys, again, if you come across these people, I want to shed light because, this is surprising to me. I knew that this group of people were always out there, but I thought they were just in some hole and they had no influence, no power whatsoever. I was proven wrong this past Sunday. They're a lot bigger than we think. They're mixed among us, unfortunately, and we need to call these people out, because if we're calling out the left for their obvious racism and we don't call out the right for their obvious racism, or the alt-right, then we're no different and we're hypocrites. And that's not what I want to be. So guys, thank you again for joining me today. I'll see you guys on the next one. God bless you guys. God bless our country. God bless Trump. And honestly, we need Christ now more than ever. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.